morning and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Fackert. I am a student at Wayzata High School, and I have been a Youth Civic Engagement Fellow with the League of Women Voters Lake Minnetonka, Plymouth area this past year. It is my honor today to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Lana Medina. Dr. Medina is a regional Emmy Award-winning journalist, award-winning researcher, and assistant professor of emerging media at the University of St. Thomas. Her work explores how social media algorithms, AI, and newsroom pressures shape local journalism and civil discourse. Before entering academia, she worked as a newspaper reporter and television news producer, experiences that continue to influence her teaching and mentorship. Today, Dr. Medina will present on the topic of how to protect ourselves from misinformation, how technology is being used to mislead, and how to avoid being fooled by fake images, stories, and videos as we approach the midterm elections. Please welcome Dr. Medina.
Oh, first off, thank you, Elizabeth, for that very warm welcome. I'm blushing a little bit here. And second off, thank you, Rebecca, and the League of Women Voters here in this area for this warm invitation. I am joyed to be here and invited, and I truly just enjoy talking about this topic because it is such a necessary issue for civic discourse and engagement today. All right, so as you see, we're discussing protecting yourself from misinformation, what to know, and how to spot it. Before we begin, however, I want to start with something a little lighthearted. I want to share this image and talk about my daughter Emma and my dog Story. She's an Australian Shepherd. Are there any Aussie fans in the audience here? You can, I'm sure, Blue Merles, they are gorgeous dogs, and such a handful. It was always around my kids that she seemed to calm down, thankfully. I wanted to start off this presentation with something lighthearted and sweet because sometimes we need those touching moments. Reasons why this is so important. But also because this isn't a real image. Real in the sense that I didn't take this picture. No one did. The dog and baby resemble real life, but they're not real. It's generated by AI. Or rather, it was created by generative AI, Gen AI for short. Let's zoom in a little bit. It's hard to see from the distance, but let's try here. Do you see any red flags that this might be AI? We're not going to answer this now, but I want you to pause and look before we go through. And we will come back to this image a little bit later. There's a lot of different details in here. And the reason I want to pause here is because generative AI is getting so much better with copy images, with resembling real life. But there are some clues. Part of what we go over in this presentation will help you identify those. Even though it is getting so much better, we can still find them and flag them. But I also want to leave you with the prompt that I entered into a generative AI visual platform to produce this image. Please create an image of a baby in a crib with an Australian Shepherd dog touching its nose to the baby's head. Please place, because I like to anthropomorphize generative AI and I can't get away from being polite, please place other typical baby room items such as a crib, rocking chair, and bookshelf with nice wallpaper in the background. What I found, and others will speak to this as well, is that the more specific you are with generative AI prompts, the easier it is to create realistic looking images. Okay, so this is where we stand today though. Generative AI in its uses in a political disinformation environment. That brings us to today's presentation. All right, now I am a professor, so as every good professor, we must start off with some definitions. So I'll begin with that. Some of these may be ones you're already very familiar with, but please bear with me. Some of them may be more or less familiar. First, misinformation. This is false information that is held or spread regardless of intent. And that is actually very important. Misinformation can be very accidental. It can be to the extent of, for instance, when I was a budding reporter, and when I was reporting about court cases and I miswrote and misunderstood various different information, and instead of explaining that somebody was arrested for allegations, I reported that they were arrested because of this. Well, that's not true. They were arrested on those allegations, on the potential. They hadn't even been charged at this point. So that actually is misinformation due to my error. There was no intent to be malicious behind this. Now, often misinformation is usually a little more clear than that. This was a very vague and accidental issue. But nonetheless, versus disinformation, false information that is spread with the intent to mislead. Usually a very malicious intent to deceive. Now, I want to back up just a little bit. There are various different types of fake news. This type, fake hoax news, is becoming much more common. Back in 2024, we saw a proliferation of these types of headlines. They're a little hard to see here, but nonetheless, this is an idea of it. We saw a proliferation of these headlines following the assassination attempt against Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. On these websites was the audio, and I'm going to play it for you right now.
His decline was our main problem.
His decline wasn't the reason he dropped out. I know all about your mutual hostility, but let me tell you, he's not leaving because of his mental decline. He and his team got kicked out because they failed to get rid of Trump. It was their only opportunity, and these idiots missed it. If only they could get rid of Trump, we would ensure their victory against any Republican.
Now, that audio you can hear sounds like who? Obama. However, it is not Obama. Instead, this was generative AI, or more specifically, deep fake. This type of content was AI generated and was led by a former Florida deputy sheriff, turned Russian fugitive with Kremlin ties, John Duggan. He and his team created websites that appeared to resemble US outlets and pumped out a series of articles falsely claiming that Obama suggested the Democratic Party was behind the failed assassination attempt against Trump. Now, with public figures, this is shockingly easy to create this type of content. I've created it myself for research experiments. You plug it in, you request it, and it spits this out very easily. We're going to come back to this later, though. Also in 2024, we see misleading news. You see about this was an attack ad that appeared to show President Biden wandering off, which seemed to reinforce a stereotype about his age. The New York Post published this image on the left with the headline, "Meander in Chief. Biden embarrasses U.S. with confused wanderings at World Conference." But an alternate image makes it clear that Biden is having a conversation. Misleading news is when the key context is removed, allowing a misleading narrative to flourish. Then we also get satire. Satire is fake and ironic news stories that are intended to be funny or entertaining. Like, for instance, this, which I grabbed from The Onion, Congress deadlocked over how to not provide health care. Sometimes, however, these can be misinterpreted as real. Hopefully not this example. But there is a danger of satire receiving and being spread. Then there's also mimic website, not just here, but an example from the first one. The idea of fake news sites that mimic the look of trusted news sources in order to fool readers into thinking a story is real. Then there's alternative facts, a different interpretation of facts usually derived from a misinterpretation of reports or by focusing on only a subset of the available information. And this one that we're seeing quite a bit, clickbait. News that is promoted with dramatic or misleading headlines that do not reflect the content of the actual story. Often you see a false headline. The article is usually something very different. People who post these get revenue from a number of clicks. We also today are seeing opinion pieces or editorials that students in my classes have confused with research articles. We also see native advertising or sponsored content that appears to resemble news but is not news. It's paid for. They want to sell, not necessarily inform, although sometimes it can inform. It tends to look like an article with the intent to promote a product, press release or publications by advocacy organizations. We also have fake Instagram posts, fake Facebook accounts, fake TikTok, etc. Fake news can fall into more than just one category. Now, this is not new. Though AI has made it much easier to create and social media platforms have made it substantially easier to share, during World War I, multiple countries produced false videos of supposed war crimes by the other side in order to rally their domestic publics. These could be incredibly realistic, but conditions have changed. On the demand side, although human psychology hasn't changed, party polarization has heightened demand for misinformation and our response to it. And the supply side, a rise of AI in social media and a breakdown of norms against lying have resulted in a dramatic increase in the supply of mis and disinformation. Obviously, news media primarily function on the supply side, but understanding the interaction between the supply and demand side dynamics is critical for thinking about potential policy responses and how we can protect ourselves. Knowledge is power. Okay, now I'm going to go over a few different graphs showing a trend regarding misinformation, and then we'll keep moving on. First, this one, the level of public misinformation. Now, this only goes up to 2020, but we do see an alarming trend right here. The percentage of citizens misinformed on a typical major issue. Then we have this one, the index, and this is from Ipsos back in 2020, based on answers from more than 50,000 people to 28 questions on various topics: immigration levels, crime rates, teenage pregnancy, obesity, how happy people are, unemployment rates, even smartphone ownership. And we're seeing at the bottom, the US, Index of Public Misperceptions about Politics and Society. And the source here of information matters, and this is a little bit hard to read, but the basic idea behind this is that this one up here, whether you trust your own experience and personal research more than academic scientific explanations, whether elections in your country, or whether you believe elections in the country are organized in a secure and transparent way, and the elites in the country have a project to replace the original population of our country with immigrants from different cultures and religions. The belief behind this is higher for each of these when the typical source of information is messaging apps, social media, family and friends, versus those more high-end sources of information which we know and trust. News from TV, from newspaper, from radio, broadcast mediums. Why? This comes down to our cognitive processing abilities and external context. On the cognitive side, for instance, we have math and statistical skills, literacy knowledge, but we also along the way develop biases and heuristic cues. Heuristic cues, for example, are those mental shortcuts that allow individuals to make rapid decisions or judgments. One of the examples I use in my classes is if you see someone walking down campus wearing, say, tweed and a blazer and carrying a briefcase, the automatic assumption of who this person is what? A professor. It's that mental shortcut we make. These have been ingrained through years of media and different perceptions. Then there's the other side of it. Then the other side of it is the type of, again, media that we process. Media, social media, politics, and our own experience. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to play a few of these videos. They were created by the News Literacy Project, which is wonderful. These videos are called Two Truths and an AI. They're a good example of how good generative AI is getting. So the question I'm going to ask you after we watch a little bit of this is, can you spot the fake? Give me a sec.
Those are real and the other is AI generated. Can you spot the fake?
Just timing, no power.
You alright? Yeah, didn't feel a thing.
All right. Now, raise of hands. Which one do you think is the fake one? Do you think number 1 is fake? Okay, do you see raise of hand? What about number 2? Number 3? All right, so there's a little bit of wiggle. We're not sure. Let's find out.
And the answer is, yep, number 1, the precision kick. Bruce Lee was known for his feats of strength and athleticism, and while there is genuine footage of his infamous 2-finger push-ups and 1-inch punches, like these 2 videos here, content creators have started making and sharing AI-generated clips of Lee and his alleged talents. The precision...
I want to pause there. It gets actually really good, and I will happily share these resources later. Okay. Oh, sorry, it's me. Now, a couple more definitions. We should be done with these after, though. But I use the term, I want to go back to the idea of AI, especially since we're diving more into this concept. First, there's generative AI, or like I said, Gen AI for short. This is AI systems that can generate content such as text, video, images, audio, and code. It includes models that produce new content based on pattern learning from training data. Examples include image generators that we've maybe heard of, DALL-E, music generators, and AI tools that generate 3D models. Then we also hear the term large language models, or LLMs, are a subset of generative AI specifically designed to generate and understand human-like text. They are trained on vast amounts of textual data and can perform tasks like text completion, translation, summarization, and dialogue generation. I also use the term, examples include ChatGPT-4, Claude, Perplexity, Llama. I also, throughout the presentation, use the term AI generated. This refers to the output produced by these systems. One more subset of definitions for you, deepfakes. Now, the difference here with deepfakes, because sometimes I think these can be confused and convoluted. It's synthetic media, images, video, audio, generated by AI to make someone appear to say or do something they did not. So for instance, that audio we had heard of Obama, that was a deepfake. Same thing with Bruce Lee here. But there are some other examples of just, for instance, when I created that image of a baby and a dog, this is not really intended to resemble anyone. This would not constitute a deepfake. Examples in this case include face swapping or voice cloning. I'm sure many of you recognize this Bond character here. This is not real. Now, I'm gonna take a quick music break, don't worry, and we're gonna hear this.
You can kick rocks if you don't like how I talk. I'm gonna keep on talking and walk my walk. Ain't changing my tone, ain't changing my song. I was born this way, been loud too long. You can hate my style, you can roll your eyes, but I ain't slowing down, I was born to rock.
All right, it's actually really good. But we'll pause there. Now, this was created by Breaking Rust. Would anyone want to help me out? Look up, could someone from the audience conduct a quick search, find out who is Breaking Rust? I know we're typically trying to put our phones away during a presentation. So you're like, why am I getting it out right now? Ah, we have someone from the back.
By Google AI, it says Breaking Rust is a fully AI-generated country music project created in 2025. Credited to an obscure figure named Rivaldo Taylor.
A+. Breaking Rust is a computer-generated country singer. Could you tell this hit song was entirely AI-generated when you listened to it? I couldn't either. Now, couple more happy, fun, interesting videos, and then we'll move on more to the politics side. I'm sure as you watch this, you are noticing a trend. This is not Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise. This is entirely AI generated. Same here. Ooh, a little too violent for me. Was there any Game of Thrones fans in the audience? Did you like the ending? Well, if you didn't, AI can create a whole new ending for you. This one I'm gonna play through. Much happier. Okay, now we're gonna get into the politics side of it. Okay, so as you can see, vastly easy to not only create these type of content, but to share it. And there is a substantial impact on misinformation. It can go all the way from this lighthearted, fluffy type of content that we've seen to having more serious consequences depending on the type of content and how it is distributed. We've seen the impact of severe mis and disinformation over the last few years, but now AI is exacerbating the problem. For instance, during Andrew Cuomo's mayoral campaign against Zoran Mandami, around the same time as the general election was airing, Cuomo's campaign posted and later took down this AI-generated video. Let's
Mamdani's opponents want you to believe he's an inexperienced radical whose policies will make New York City more dangerous. But what do his actual supporters think?
Mamdani isn't crazy.
He's just trying to even the playing field.
You know, give everyone a fair shot. Sure, he said multiple times we need to defund the police, but that was just a metaphor.
And yes, he did say crime is a social construct, but that was also a metaphor.
His main backer, the Democratic Socialists' ideas are common sense, such as
Decriminalizing misdemeanors, like shoplifting.
third-degree assault, trespassing, prostitution,
And drunk driving.
With plans to decriminalize all drugs, Mamdani will be a job creator for drug dealers.
Instead of helping us homeless get off the streets and into the mental health facilities we need, he wants to give us safe injection sites to do crack and let us sleep in subway carts.
Now, Cuomo's campaign posted and later took down the AI-generated video depicting Mamdani's supporters as trespassers, domestic abusers, drunken drivers, among others. In New York, this did potentially violate state election law, but only because they didn't properly disclose that it was AI-generated. We're going to discuss a little bit of the legal issues, but less so. We're going to focus more on how we can be aware of the type of content that's being shared. And there is a plethora of types of content coming, not from just one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, in here, we have both sides of the political spectrum in Texas. Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General and a Republican Senate candidate in the state, posted a video in January that showed two of his opponents dancing the Senate swing and the Washington waltz. Let's.
Cornyn from day one has actually been very helpful to me.
Publicly, they're opponents. Privately, they're perfectly in step. Crockett calls Cornyn her best partner in the Senate. It's not easy to get things done, especially if you don't have a dance partner. Cornyn said, so I offered to be your dance partner.
He has been actually a great partner.
The Senate swing.
I will tell you that I honestly have the utmost respect for John Cornyn. He has been a good partner.
The Washington waltz.
I can tell you that I've worked with Senator Cornyn.
Cornyn and Crockett, the perfect pair.
So as you see, the ad depicts a smiling but digitally faked version of a Republican who Mr. Paxton is challenging, Senator John Cornyn of Texas, as he twirls with Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat running in the party's primary race for Senate. The backgrounds include what appears to be a Texas dance hall and the U.S. Capitol. And then in response, just a couple months later, in March specifically, Senator John Cornyn's campaign posted a political ad using an AI-generated man resembling Ken Paxton that's a parody of B-52's Love Shack.
The offense, I'm by the side of the road. That says 15 miles to Ken's Love Shack. Ken's Love Shack. Yeah, yeah. He's heading down the corrupt highway, looking for his lying getaway. Got himself a ride at Uber tonight, heading on down to the Love Shack. Love Shack, yeah. He's got him a condo. It seats a...
Oh, sorry, perfect timing. Now, as you can see, AI-generated content is being shared on multiple sides of the political spectrum. Now, you might wonder, why don't we see this on TV? Why is this even allowed at all? Well, first off, I want to mention a couple things. First off, Mr. Paxton's video was published on social media. It's not something that could air on linear television today, or ever. FCC regulations have very specific rules, equal coverage of candidates. For instance, this lacks the I approve this message disclaimer that would be required by federal law. It runs for 39 seconds, too long for a standard commercial slot. But such rules do not apply to digital ads, which is where a preponderance of political ad spending is moving as Americans spend less and less time consuming regular television broadcasts. Now, there are no current federal regulations on the use of AI-generated content in political ads. Let me clarify that. There is no federal regulations. That does not mean things aren't happening at the state level. That is slightly different. Although the videos, however, are supposed to include disclaimers, which is why this is included in one of those videos. Certain video content depicted in this advertising was generated by artificial intelligence and is satire that does not represent real events. Now, a number of you could have probably already come to that conclusion yourself. So I'm not sure the disclaimer is that useful. However, at other times, when it is less applicable or less clear that it is AI-generated content, that disclaimer is very important. Although I would add the caveat. There is a number of research out there that indicates to what extent we value transparency and disclaimers versus to what extent we actually engage with it or view it, pay attention to it. They're two very different things, unfortunately. So as useful and wonderful as disclaimers are, that is not really fixing the problem. Okay. Now, there are, again, no current federal regulations. However, there are various states that have implemented laws about the use of deepfakes or generative AI in campaign ads. Texas, for example, has a ban of deepfakes in state races, but not federal ones, which means the Texas Senate race, their use of deepfakes and the back and forth is technically legal, which is why we've seen all of that. Okay. So restrictions on AI may be difficult moving forward. Why is this? First, there is that messy line between election integrity, which we know and value, and the problem when you create legislation when that starts to border on First Amendment protection. It is very difficult to create something specific. However, starting in 2019, states began regulating deepfakes in political campaigns. For example, California and Texas do outlaw the creation and distribution of deepfakes that are close to elections, within, I believe, about 90 days. However, California will allow it if it is disclosed. So again, but disclosure. Now, more than 20 states ban deepfakes in campaign. However, legal challenges continue. Now, as many of you know in this room, I imagine, Minnesota is one of them. However, let's take a look at this ad parody. Nope. We might not actually watch this one. Yep, that one's not going to play for me. Okay, this is a Kamala Harris campaign ad parody, if you could watch it at this time, that was created by Chris Coles, who runs an account called Mr. Reagan. He created a deepfake video of Kamala Harris during the 2024 presidential campaign. The video, which seemed to indicate her basically making fun of the idea of a diversity hire, an idea behind that. The video gained in prominence on X after Elon Musk shared it on his platform. Then Coles, alongside a Minnesota state representative, filed a suit to stop the deepfakes law with the idea that if this would prevent the sharing of this type of content. Now, I would like to clarify, Minnesota's deepfakes law prohibits an image or video that is so realistic that a reasonable person would believe it depicts speech or conduct of an individual who did not in fact engage in such speech or conduct. And again, within 90 days of an election. Now, about just 2 months ago, a U.S. Court of Appeals declined to block the state law. So it does still continue. However, look at that specific language. So realistic that a reasonable person would believe it depicts speech or conduct of an individual who did not in fact engage in such speech or conduct. Well, that really very specifically applies only to deepfakes. And there is some wiggle room there. If it is very clear, for instance, that it is satire, it would not necessarily fall under the purview of this law. Now, many of you may have seen this before. This one will play at least. This was a campaign ad that was created against Adam Schwartz. It was a recent AI-generated campaign effort criticizing GOP Senate candidate Adam Schwartz. Unlikely, however, to fall under the law because it did not fit the requirements of A, realistic, or even speech or conduct. So this would not fall under this purview. And yet this type of content is very easy to share and send. So, we've discussed this. Let's do another two truths and an AI.
One of these videos are real, the other is AI generated. Can you spot the fake?
наконец-то нормальные горки. Ни хера нас...
All right, time's up. And the answer...
What do you think? Do you think it's number 1? Raise of hands if you think it's number 1. That's the fake. Okay, a few. Number 2? Majority there. Number 3? Okay. I would like to just add a quick little mention that my students were all fooled by this one.
Yep, number 3, the giant sledding hill. This video went viral in January 2026 after nearly 7 feet of snow fell on Russia's eastern peninsula. And when this sort of thing happens, a major weather event like a hurricane or an earthquake or a major snowstorm, social media feeds fill up with content that supposedly shows the surreal aftermath. And a lot of it is real. So when we're scrolling on social media and we see news reports and photographs about these genuine events, it's easy for us to let our guard down. It happened to me. When I first saw this video, I thought it was real. I knew that there was a massive snowstorm in Russia, and the video looked real enough that I didn't even question it. And there are so many ways I could have quickly...
We'll pause right there. Most of my students also thought number 2 was the fake one. All right. Hang on. Excuse me. Now, we have seen a number of deepfake and generative AI videos so far. And as active and engaged citizens, we're noticing a pattern here, an overarching increase in mis and disinformation. So let's take a look at some of the stats here for the frequency of seeing false or misleading information online. Now, this is by a YouGov poll from May of 2025, so just last year. This is by age group. So we do see a frequency increasing. However, I would like to clarify that. Look at this number. To what extent are we even sure that what we're seeing is mis or disinformation? Then, by party ID. It's pretty much daily across the board with a slight difference between Democrat and Republican, but really, overall, we're just seeing a frequency of mis and disinformation that is just increasingly being spread online. Then, this one is important. The level of confidence in distinguishing between real news from false news. The highest number by age group, and to be honest, by age group, it is pretty much uniform. There is no difference. We're all struggling to tell the difference between real and fake information. And the majority are just somewhat confident, and then numbers throughout the board if you are very confident versus not confident. Same here for party ID. It's not really making a difference. The big difference is that we just cannot tell because the technology is getting so good. Now, one thing to understand is many of you have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a cognitive bias where individuals with limited knowledge or competence in a domain greatly overestimate their own knowledge or competence. Because they lack expertise, it's hard to recognize that, resulting in a dual burden of being unskilled and unaware of it. So again, knowledge is power. And again, the spread of fake content. I want to come back to the idea of why that information is spreading so quickly. So yes, it is very easy to generate, but why is it spreading so fast? So first, research back in 2018 showed that fake news stories were 6 times faster on average to spread on social media than true stories. 6 times faster. False information does spread faster or more broadly compared to accurate information. But why is this? First, people tend to believe what they see and hear first. And with generative AI, it's starting to look pretty real. Also, correcting misinformation can have the effect of spreading misinformation because it keeps the information very present in our mind. Yeah. Next, misinformation, when it's conveyed with authority and confidence, such as up here at a podium, it is more believable than accurate information when comes across as vague or incomplete. Then, we tend to believe videos even when we know videos can be faked. Also, there is a plethora of research out there that has shown, especially in advertising and public relations, that humorous content and controversial content is more likely to engage us and content we are more likely to remember. And a lot of that content is exactly what we're seeing already. There's also a couple psychological effects coming to play here. One is confirmation bias. This is our psychological tendency to interpret claims in ways that fit our partisan beliefs and biases. And as you can see here, it does not matter which side of the partisan divide you are. Then there's also cue taking, the tendency to accept facts at face value, claims made by our party leader or like-minded media sources. And contributing to the problem is our flight from reliable news sources. More people turning to social media, no matter the age group or audience, and it is very easy for that content to be shared, whether it is true or not, but also just because of the plethora of content out there and how easy we are swiping and scrolling through, it is hard to pause and reflect. Now, here's where we come back to, we have made this a very depressing but some occasionally lighthearted presentation so far. Let's get to the good stuff. Principles of media literacy. This is a class I truly love teaching. Now, number one, all media texts are constructed. That's a very interesting idea. You might even think that seems like a very obvious statement, but even think about the fact of surveillance video camera is still constructed. Well, how is that? It's meant to just be exactly what you see. The angle of the camera, the resolution, number of different factors play into the fact that it is still constructed in some way. When we understand that, we can take a more critical approach to media. The second one, media messages are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. For example, when we think of wonderful rom-com films, my favorite especially, they have very specific rules they follow designed to engage you, to make you laugh, to make you feel emotionally tugged at it. And the same goes with other types of content. They follow very specific rules to engage you, as well as platforms for that matter. Third, different people experience the same media message very differently. To be honest, I feel like this one goes without saying almost, but still worth repeating. Media have embedded values and points of views. This is more specifically referring to the creators of those media. And then most media are organized to gain profit, power, or both. When we think about why that type of content is created and why it is shared and how it is, this is what we come back to. The intention is to engage us. Dallas Blythe, sorry, I just misspoke that. He wrote a really influential article from 1981. And it introduced the idea of the audience commodity. This is the idea that it is not that the media information is being sold, but that you, the audience, is being sold. Other more recent terms that have come to light, attention economy. Again, this is based on the idea that your attention is what's being sold to advertisers. So the media is created to engage you as much as possible. Now, let's get into the really meat and potatoes of this presentation, which is, okay, it's gotten a little depressing. There is some bad stuff. There are some bad actors out there. What are some ways we can protect ourselves? We know, and from media literacy lectures, there's been a plethora of various tips and things you have come across, and I'm sure, and I thought about including them in all of the various different aspects you've heard about. Let's search out for credible news sources, and we know about all of those credible news sources, especially here in Minnesota. There is the Star Tribune, there is KARE 11, there is KSTB, there is the MinPost, there's the Minnesota Reformer. I could go on and on. The Sahan Journal. Again, I could really go on and on. Minnesota loves its media. This is wonderful to see. You know how to seek out credible news sources. You know to fact check. You know to pause and reflect. You know to question information already. So instead of bringing up what you already know, I'm going to discuss some of the ways you can look at the images and the videos that are coming through, remembering that all of that is constructed in one way or another, and think, okay, how can I be more discerning? So the first clue of about 6 various different categories. The first one, anatomical and object failures. Now this one you may already recognize. If it looks too good to be true, it often is. A couple things you can do to recognize it. First one, zoom to 100% on faces if you have the option to do so. Look for natural skin texture, pores, minor asymmetries. Hair strand analysis. Individual strands, for instance, versus visible painted or rendered appearance, that will give you some type of clue. Then teeth examination, if you can see it in here and you don't. But are there any natural imperfections versus a uniform perfection? I'm sure I'm not the only one that even with dental work has those natural imperfections. They should be there usually. Clothing physics, natural wrinkles, fabric textures. Are there wear patterns that are present in the image? If it's high profile, you can compare it to various other images that exist out there as well. But basically what you're looking at is an overall perfection audit. Does the grooming level match what should be there? Now, the next one, the second clue, geometric physics violations. Basically, AI ignores nature. AI struggles with fundamental physics. It's hard for AI because this requires an understanding of 3D space and light behavior. Real buildings follow the laws of perspective. Parallel lines converge to a single point on the horizon, as you see there. AI often creates buildings or images where roof lines, for instance, point left while window lines point right. You see here in this example, this is not matching what it should be. Now, if we saw this initially, we might not flag it. But if you are having that wiggle of concern, if something feels a little bit odd, this is one of the things to look for. You can also search for reflective surfaces in the images. Water, glass, mirrors. Does it make sense to what it should be there? If possible, you can draw lines connecting objects to reflections. Does the line meet the surface at the right angles? Third, technical fingerprints and pixel analysis. Now, some of this requires some high-tech software, but there are some nice tools out there, and I've compiled them for you today. First off, when AI creates an image, it leaves behind hidden clues in the file, a mathematical signature. Think of it like invisible fingerprints that special tools can detect. Yay. These clues are found in the way pixels are arranged and how the file is compressed. Think of it like DNA evidence that proves something was created by AI rather than captured by a real camera. Now, there are some useful websites that can help detect AI-generated content. For instance, there's the Image Verification Assistant, and all of these links are posted on a special shared document that I've provided for everyone. There's a QR code at the end, but I can email it as well, or however you would like it. There's also Google Gemini, SynthID, Image Whisperer, and Forensically. This uses a frequency domain visualization. Now, I want to again clarify at the beginning, help verify. They can help detect AI-generated content, but these are not foolproof. The French philosopher Jacques Ellul, he wrote about using technology to solve problems caused by technology, and he was right. It's a cyclical problem, unfortunately, which the more you find tools to fix the problem, or to even recognize the problem in this case, the more the technology is going to get better and better. But right now, these are still pretty good. I had a class of University of St. Thomas students create images using generative AI and then try to detect it using all of these different types of software. It was not a great sample, but nonetheless, my sample of students were pretty good. And roughly 70% of the time it worked. Or they would at least flag it as possible AI generated. So that was actually pretty nice, I found. Okay, now, other things you can do is you can zoom in to 100% on areas like skin or sky. Does the texture have a random irregular quality which should show up with that zoomed in aspect, or does it look too smooth? Another thing you can do, which is very useful, you can check the file's hidden information. You can search for properties on a PC, or you can search Get Info on Mac. And I've compiled a list of basically how-to videos from YouTube showing how to access that information if you'd like to review. Basically, you want to look at the metadata. Now, fourth clue, voice and audio artifacts. Voice cloning technology can replicate almost anyone's voice, especially if audio of their voices already exists and has been published, from just seconds of audio. But it leaves detectable traces of artificial generation in speech patterns. Also, emotional authenticity is often lasting, and there might be some acoustic characteristics. So first off, unnatural pacing, lack of hesitations or breathing. Flawless pronunciation. I'm sure I'm not the only person. And I've done so even today, where pronunciations issues tend to happen when we speak. And yet in AI, missing environmental background noise. For instance, even in this room, we should be hearing various different little movements in this recording. Unless a recording is in a soundproofed room, there should be something, even light, in the background. Although I will, with the caveat that you can still edit that out. But for instance, what is the likelihood that it has been edited out? If it is not there, that is nonetheless a flag that something's going on behind the scenes. Now, let's play this audio one more time. Let's see if we can hear something that doesn't sound right.
His decline was our main problem.
His decline wasn't the reason he dropped out. I know all about your mutual hostility, but let me tell you, he's not leaving because of his mental decline. He and his team got kicked out because they failed to get rid of Trump. It was their only opportunity, and these idiots missed it. If only they could get rid of Trump, we would ensure their victory against any Republican candidate.
Now, do you recognize something from that list that would help you flag that? Pacing. Yep, the pacing does not make sense how most people talk. Anything else? 100%. It just flat out doesn't make sense, which is the most natural red flag. But if you were questioning it a little bit, some of the other things, and I don't really hear breathing in there either. But again, it's not something you listen for. You have to pause and think back. Is it there? Or rather, is it not there? Okay. Oh, of course.
Wouldn't all those things be something they could fix very easily? I mean, you're giving this lecture, there's experts that know this, and they can easily modify all the things you just put up there.
You can't, that is a very good point, a very excellent point. In fact, and that is one of the issues. For instance, when I was generating that image of a baby and a dog that was intended to resemble my daughter, by altering the prompt, I can try to add back in those clues. Say, oh, you should add in some messiness on the room floor, which is something I had to think about. And there are also the fact that in a normal baby room, there should be some nice wallpaper on the wall, because that's typically what you do when you bring home a newborn. You want to make the room really nice. So there you can add back in those flaws. However, since a lot of this information is being generated very quickly, nonetheless, most of the time, they are not thinking about, oh, I need to continue adding in the prompt to add in breathing and pacing and other issues. Also, just because, and at least right at this moment to where the technology is, just because you can include that into the prompt doesn't mean it can still do it to the extent as what is normal human. But that's a very good question. Excellent. There are some other detectors you can use, like Haya Deepfake Voice Detector. It's through a Chrome browser, and it's free to use about 20 times a month. Alternatively, if you have the time, you can download the audio and feed it into an AI transcription tool, such as Otter or Notter, and then request using one of the LLMs, like I mentioned earlier, like ChatGPT-4 or Claude, etc. Not Claude, but one of the other ones, and request a semantic analysis of it. That will flag it pretty consistently. Again, it's probably about 70 to 75% of the time. But nonetheless, it's a nice little background tool. Okay, the fifth clue, temporal and contextual logic. This AI-generated content is based on visual patterns, but it doesn't often understand real-world context or temporal logic. There often should be a season or weather sanity check. Technology timeline is a good clue. Geographic gut check, for instance, in this background here. Does this make sense if you understand the street? Again, this is more specifically if you recognize the locale, not as useful if you don't. Source credibility, thinking about where it came from, looking at other things. The next one is behavioral pattern recognition, and I think this one is much more useful. For instance, crowd uniformity of this AI-generated image of a protest. There's too many people of a similar age, appearance, or style of dress. That should be a flag on its own. But also attention pattern. Are they looking in the same direction or at the camera? I mean, you are all looking at this screen very obviously for a specific reason, but generally in a protest, that's not what's going to happen. People should be moving around and looking, attention should be diverted. There should be even a brief conversation as two people walk next to each other. That would be the normal expectation. Also, emotional authenticity. I mean, it is possible this person would be smiling and cheering in front of a camera as they're protesting, but it still raises a little bit of a flag. And if I zoomed in, I'm going to see a very grouchy person over here, and I'm going to see some other flags. Also, movement realism, natural human spacing and body language. Again, it's one of those things that at initial glance, this looks like, except for the AI-generated image logo on there, this looks like it should be real. But if we pause and reflect, there are some additional flags here. So I'm going to bring us back to media literacy principles. Again, all media messages are constructed. So we ask ourselves, who created this message? They're constructed using a creative language with its own rules. So we think, we ask, what creative techniques are used to attract my attention? For instance, even just this clicker right here and the red light. Now, different people experience the same media differently. How might different people understand this message differently from me? Media have embedded values and points of view, so we ask what lifestyles, values, or points of view are represented or omitted from this message. And if we know that most media are organized to gain profit, power, or both, we can start to question, why is this message being sent? Okay, now for the last few minutes, I want to do Q&A, but I have one more of these videos to play. Let's see how we do. And again, this one also fooled some of my students, so.
Videos are real, the other is AI generated.
Oh.
Can you spot the fake?
All right, which one do you think is fake? Number 1? 2? Oh, maybe. 3? There's the majority. Let's see if you're right.
Yep, number 3. That is not a real video of Punch the Monkey. You have certainly seen videos of Punch, the baby Japanese macaw monkey who is supposedly being bullied by some of the older monkeys in his habitat. And as these genuine clips started to go viral, so did a bunch of AI-generated content. Now, some of this stuff is pretty easy to spot, but some of it can be kind of convincing. The video of Punch getting a replacement plush looks pretty real at first glance, but a careful examination reveals a few flaws. Like, why does this soft plush's arm defy gravity? And wait, is that even Punch? And Punch's plushie can be purchased from IKEA.
We'll pause there for that. It's very cute, though. Yeah. Okay, one more thing. Now that we've had such a deep discussion on AI, I want to come back to this image of a baby and a dog. Do you notice any red flags in here from this image that doesn't make sense to you? Shadows, exactly. Right here from the chair. This defies this light balance. And we also see the extraordinary amount of light right here, but it doesn't make quite sense otherwise. Absolutely. You see, yes? Absolutely right. That's a very big Australian Shepherd. Anything else? Yes. I would agree. There is something off about this. And even if you're not thinking that, has anyone ever seen a crib height like that? Something's off there. I've never seen one. Maybe one does exist, but usually this bar and this bar are intended to be even. By the way, this was something I was worried about when I was first creating this image. Like, oh, is this too obvious that the crib doesn't make sense? I actually tried altering the prompt to say, no, I want this bar and this bar, and I tried varying the language to get these even. AI wouldn't do it. It couldn't seem to figure out what I was referring to, even no matter how I varied the language. It couldn't get it right. So it's still not good enough, which is reassuring to us all. Does anyone notice anything else? Yeah. I do, and It does seem usually that's a much smaller thick book, or a thick book, but it's much smaller. And you can't see it as well, but that's a toy, which in fairness on a bookshelf, that's possible. Yeah, exactly. And if you do, and we couldn't zoom in quite as much here, but if you do zoom in, you're going to see some issues with this image. When I showed this to my students, they thought, but the baby's head should be over here. But you all are very wise, and you know the babies move around. That was what they flagged. But nonetheless, okay. Now, I did provide access to the materials, and if anyone would like it emailed to them, I can provide that or have it distributed out through Rebecca. But if you would like to just access it right now through the QR code, that will take you to a shared Google document where I've linked all of the various different resources that obviously you couldn't access when they're just linked. Now, questions? Yes. Yes and no. So there are various different AI detectors out there. There's a plethora of them, honestly, and I can include them on there. Some of them are very good at detecting AI-generated content, and I'm a little bit sad to say I've used them countless times for when I've questioned student work. They are fairly good. However, I do want to caveat that they are not always perfect. Part of the problem is that they're looking for various different patterns within the AI, within writing, to see if it flags for it. Things that are basically too perfect of writing, or if it follows a certain structure that AI is notorious for. For instance, AI is very notorious for sycophantic language, first of all. You all have probably recognized this, but it also very commonly uses certain different cues. For instance, it likes to give lists of 3 items to pretty much anything you requested of. 3 different options, even if a list of 5 would be much better, or if 2 really only makes sense, but it continues to always add in 3. That's just one example, but I can include those AI detector links onto the sheet. Yes? Oh, it was supposed to be. Thank you for letting me know. I will make that available within the next bit then. Absolutely, yes. I will repeat the questions, and I will make those materials accessible, and I will provide some links to AI detectors that will help try to early clues about whether text is AI generated or not. Yes. Oh, 100%. In fact, I actually did have a slide up there about a various different list of fact-checking websites, including Snopes and other ones, and I will include them onto that document within the next hour. And I think they are a great resource, first off. Some of the reason I ended up taking it off is because I was thinking in the mindset of the fact of when you are, say, scrolling on Instagram or Facebook or other different types of social media sites, that sometimes it's hard or that we don't always flag various different things. So I was focused more on the AI detection. But the first thing you do, if you can't flag it yourself, but you're just wanting to be 100% sure, especially before you decide to share it or talk to someone about it, is you should go to those sites. And news websites do try as much as they can, especially those fact-checking sites, to verify that type of information. For instance, many of you probably saw the AI doctored image that the White House shared of Nakima Armstrong yes. News picked up on that very quickly and had fact-check stories about that out there. So absolutely, yes.
Is there any nation or state that has AI deepfake type legislation that you agree with and think is an example to use?
Yes, do I think there are any nation or state that has, sorry, say that one more time. I just want to make sure I'm repeating it exactly right.
You could probably say it better. Is there any set of laws
Yeah.
that is generated by some state or nation that does a good job of protecting its citizens from fake AI?
No, absolutely. Great question. So this is the idea about whether there's any state or national laws that do a very good job of trying to protect citizens against deepfake or other AI generated types of content. So first off, as we mentioned, there is no federal regulation in the US. However, in the European Union, they are starting to develop various different types of regulations specific to the EU, and so specific to only those locations, that is trying to prevent or at least regulate AI generated. However, primarily it is about disclosure. And part of the reason is that they are struggling with the fundamental aspect of, for instance, we saw all of those light-hearted videos that were fluffy and funny. Even the ones of the little monkey are really cute. So which ones do you prevent? Which ones do you allow? Which ones fall under the purview of First Amendment rights or just having fun with the type of technology and media content we create? Versus to what extent are we bordering on election integrity issues or citizen and our engagement and our ability to know information? I don't think there is a perfect answer to that. Part of the problem, and I think is really the issue, is the distribution of that content. Algorithmically ranked content that gets shared on various different platforms, and even algorithmically ranked content on news websites or on Google search prioritizes very specific content over others. Because again, it's not designed for your efficacy. It's designed to make money. It's a very critical outlook, but it is nonetheless true. So we have to be engaged consumers. So part of the issue really comes down to the overwhelming free allowance of digital platforms, for instance, and websites, to be able to distribute and share as they so choose and algorithmically rank for monetization purposes. So that's one of the core issues out there. But there are some I think the EU is probably doing the most to try to prevent human harm, protect citizens out of others, but there are both the issue of to what extent are you bordering on our rights, are you verging into our rights, and to what extent is it just fun and a playful tool, but also the distribution aspect. That is a great question. Yes? Mm. Well, I do think there is merit in still questioning all type of content out there. However, the ones who are published on those fact-checking websites do tend to put much more effort into verifying content. But nonetheless, nothing is perfect. Even the tools, as I was showing you, some of those only had a 75% rate of access. However, I think those are more in extreme cases. It is generally a good idea to be critical and careful and verify information as much as possible, even if that means verifying the verifiers. But being a proactive, engaged citizen is often just the first step, which all of you are, clearly, from just even being here. Yes? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so the question is about the recent court ruling that specifically was to YouTube, or owned by Alphabet, and to, and now I'm blanking, so I'm actually not going to state this because I don't want to misstate, but the fact that the court ruling did show liability for harm based on content shared on social media platforms, specifically in this case, that led to harm of children or teenagers, and in the connection to AI. I think yes and no. First off, the fact that social media platforms were held accountable is is amazing. If you think about the history of digital platforms, just even reaching that landmark is historic. Digital platforms have very long been protected. This goes back to the 1996 Communications Decency Act. It was actually bipartisan legislation, and I'm forgetting the names of the two individuals. It was Chris Cox, and I can't remember the other one. But they devised an aspect of this bill, or this legislation, that basically said, it was 26 words, actually. That's all it was, 26 words, that basically gave digital platforms legal immunity from any harm caused. It treated them as an intermediary or a third-party platform. So it doesn't matter if, for instance, I were to go and post something derogatory, inflammatory, or negative against an individual on, say, Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. The platform is under no requirement to take it down. It doesn't matter, for instance, if I post anything really cruel or harmful or spreading disinformation online. The platform is under no legal obligation to take it down. They can't be sued for that. There's very limited things that they can be sued for. And the fact that they were sued for that at all is mind-blowing because of that very broad protection that dates back to 1996 when the internet was still in its early years of flourishing. Now, to what extent this connects to AI, it is a good sign that we're seeing that platforms held accountable. So that means that, for instance, when we're questioning the idea of the prevention and stop of AI deepfakes, that means potentially, if this could continue and keep going in various different ways, and I'm not a legal expert by any means, but it is a good sign that platforms could potentially be held accountable for harmful content. However, even that is still very narrow. See, we tend as a society to be more finicky or grouchy when it comes to any harm caused to children, for instance, or sexual harm. But when it comes to broader harm, even campaign or political, we tend to fight this out of concern that it's bordering on our First Amendment rights. So yes, it's a good sign, but it's more of a good sign for the sense of if there is AI-generated content that is harmful or depicts children in a very upsetting or truly just malicious way. One more question. Yes? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent question, asking about the accuracy of ChatGPT and just the example of like how, to what extent we are using it and to what extent we can rely on it as a trustworthy and accurate source. So I have a lot of thoughts about this and a lot of answers based on research, but also personal experience. First off, ChatGPT is a wonderful source. The fact that it is open to the public is very useful. However, there are a number of issues, both towards accuracy and inherent biases that are built into the system. Because right now that system is just relying on very specific data that's available online. And it's creating answers based on generation, based on predictable types of content. It gets a little complicated, so we'll kind of leave it to that. So some of the issues involved with it, if, for instance, the information that it's relying on is inaccurate, is going to spit back out that inaccurate information, especially if, for instance, only more recently accurate information, or, for instance, if there is a proliferation of inaccurate content, and not even because, excuse me, I'm going to back up. If, for instance, we spent years thinking that X led to Y, and then within the last 5 years, doctors realized that was not the case. And research started coming out showing that X does not lead to Y, that it's not true. Well, it doesn't mean that the information that was originally published was intended to be inaccurate, but it still is. So AI does not always have access to that more recent information that's coming forth, information that your doctors may be more well aware of than, say, the internet as being published. It's hard to correct misinformation, both online and in our minds. So if AI is relying on X leads to Y based on what's already out there, it's not necessarily bringing in the new stuff that's showing that X does not lead to Y. So that's problem number one. Second, there's biases inherent in the data that exists. And I could use many examples, but for the sake of time, I won't, and it's not as relevant to your question. But there are a lot of biases built into the information that is available online. So that's number two. Number three is I'm sure a number of you have seen, for example, the AI overviews when you type in a question on Google, and it spits back this lovely little bullet-pointed answer for you about. Now, research has shown that that answer, while often accurate, is not always accurate. A fellow colleague of mine recently conducted a study, in fact, of AI overviews based on 5 different news topics. We analyzed the type of content it spit out, the information, and we compared it to the sources, which it shows you in there if you decide to click on it. It was very often wrong, shockingly wrong for a very small sample. We have submitted that study to a symposium and are hoping to get it published, but it is not yet available right now. But if anyone would like to see a preview of it, I'd be happy to share it just to give you an idea. So it is not always accurate, and sometimes you have to nitpick through it with a fine-tooth comb to see those inaccuracies. But it looks really great because it is very kind when it answers you. But in general, as long as if you're using it as a guide, but then verifying the information later, I don't see any basic harm in that.